I thought about making a video where I rant about anti-intellectualism, about books, social media, communities only reading the same books, etc. But then I decided I would not do that because I didn't think it would be productive. So instead, here is my guide to how to start non-fiction reading. Hi, I'm Jenni, and we're still going through that bit of a heat wave here in Finland, so I do have to have the fan on. I apologize if it bothers you. I have started adding non-fiction reading into my selection of books I read gradually more and more every year. I do not claim to know everything about non-fiction reading. I am still growing myself as a non-fiction reader and a person, as we all should. But here are my suggestions and tips on how to become a non-fiction reader, how to build your way up to be more tuned to reading non-fiction. I will also share some of my favorite non-fiction books and books I recommend. Alright, if you are starting from absolute zero, I recommend art books or photography books. Photography and art books usually include an introduction or a foreword regarding the topic at hand, and then a deeper introduction to the artist itself. And then after those, which share information about an artist that you are about to read about, a photographer's view on photography, or a recap of the work thus far, you will have their work presented. So if you are starting from zero, I think photography books are a great way to start because the reading itself is minimal and it's more about like taking in the photography or the art. An example of this is Lee Miller Photographs by Anthony Penrose, foreword by Kate Winslet. So at first you can see foreword and then introduction, which is about 15 pages, which is not bad at all. And then you have a bunch of Lee Miller's photographs. She was a remarkable photographer and specifically a war photographer during World War II. But if you feel like you can handle a bit more, I suggest choosing a book that discusses a specific era or time or a phenomenon, and it features plenty of photos in that book. A book like We Are Everywhere, Protest, Power and Pride in the History of Queer Liberation by Matthew Reamer and Leighton Brown. So this is all about queer history, especially in the US, and it features so many beautiful photographs of the time as well as text. So I think these types of books are really great when you start reading nonfiction. Well, if you're not interested in art books or photography, I do suggest starting from children's graphic books. Now I know it might feel weird to read children's books, but regarding nonfiction, but I feel like these books give you beautiful illustrations on the topic at hand, and they present a simplified version of a historical topic or event. I read this children's book called The Teacher's March by Rich Wallace and Sandra Neal Wallace. It features beautiful illustrations by Charlie Palmer and taught me about a part of US civil rights history that I didn't know about, how black teachers in Selma, Alabama fought for their civil rights. So if you are starting from zero when it comes to nonfiction reading, maybe children's books about historical events would be something where you could start. Okay, so that was for complete beginners who have never read any nonfiction before. But I think the first step when it comes to nonfiction reading would be reading autobiographies or biographies about people you are interested in. Because when you are familiar with the person that you are reading about, when you want to specifically learn about a person, I feel like that's a great way to start nonfiction reading because you have this already interest in going through a nonfiction text when it's about a specific person. You will read about their thoughts, about their careers, about their personal lives, about social movements, and I feel like that's again a great accessible way to start nonfiction reading. I have two autobiographies that I really recommend if you are interested in the people that they are about. First one is My Love Story by Tina Turner. She's obviously the queen of rock, but she also has had a very turbulent personal life. And in her autobiography, you can really read and hear her voice talk about all of these things that happened to her life, and how even though she went through these horrible times, she still continued on focusing on her solo career. I also watched a Tina Turner documentary before I read her autobiography, so that also helped me with the reading of her autobiography. Another autobiography that I really recommend is The Third Gilmore Girl by Kelly Bishop. In this autobiography, Kelly Bishop just dives directly into her career on Broadway as a dancer, as a performer. And that's what I really liked about this book, because while of course she discusses some of her personal thoughts and things that happened in her personal life, it's mostly focused on her career, and that was so interesting to learn about, since I only knew her as Emily Gilmore from Gilmore Girls. And don't worry, there's a chapter completely dedicated to the iconic Emily Gilmore. While these autobiographies or biographies tend to focus on just one individual person, they often reflect the times that they have lived, the personal struggles they have had, and how they are seen and how they compare to the bigger picture at hand. Thus, I think reading biographies is a great way to learn about an individual experience during a specific time, era, or social phenomena. So moving on from autobiographies, my second step in learning how to read and become more familiar with nonfiction reading is to read personal essay collections or even published diaries. If you feel like you have an interest in nonfiction but don't want to read an autobiography fully, or don't want to dive into a fully historical event or societal phenomenon yet, personal essays are a great step at this point. They often have authors reflecting on specific historical events and how those impacted their own life, how different expectations and norms impacted their own life, and they are usually specifically about one topic, so you can kind of already in the beginning know what you're about to read. One essay collection that I really want to recommend is Bone Black by Bell Hooks. It's about Bell Hooks growing up as a young black girl in southern US states in Kentucky, and the essays are only a couple of pages long, and they dive into how she, as a child, as a young girl, as a young black girl, felt when she felt like she was so different from everyone else, and how she felt so much pressure to be one certain way, but knowing that that was not really her, and how writing and reading brought her some solace and comfort to her. And she is a notable author and thinker, and just overall an incredible author. So I thought this essay collection was very accessible. I read it while I had pneumonia, so I'm sure you can read it too. So before diving into nonfiction books about historical events or societal phenomena, my next step would be to read nonfiction books with mixed type of texts. These types of collections usually feature multiple authors and have texts such as articles, interviews, poems, maybe even short stories, etc. A perfect example of a book like this is Light in Gaza, which discusses society and life in Gaza and all the different ways Israel has suppressed Palestinian people, to say the least, and how difficult it makes life for them, but how they have persisted through it all. Obviously, this was written way before the current genocide that is happening in Gaza. Israel is currently starving Palestinians on purpose, and the aid should be let in. And I hate that our Western governments are just sitting there doing nothing, or even worse, just continuing on with trade with Israel and even arms trade with Israel, and it's just so sickening to me. Free Palestine and the genocide in Gaza. The texts in this book feature interviews, articles, personal essays, poetry, and they talk about so many different aspects of life in Gaza that you would probably not even expect. One article focused on agriculture in Gaza, which I thought was so educational. Another one focused on opening up a library in Gaza by Mossab Abu Toha, which was then Edward Said Library of Gaza, which obviously has been demolished by Israel. So if you feel wary about starting a non-fiction book about a historical event, maybe a book that features different types of text could be a good place to continue on your non-fiction reading journey, as it gives you so many ways to learn about the same topic in different forms of text. And I think that's really great when it comes to reading about very heavy topics as well. And they teach you so much more when you have different kinds of text as well. And once again, Free Palestine and the apartheid. Now I feel like after those steps, it's time to fully deep dive into non-fiction. I think it's the best thing to start with choosing a topic that you are genuinely interested in and even know a little bit about. And do some research, find out who are the top authors of the topic, maybe even watch a documentary beforehand so you can digest and internalize the knowledge of what happened, what, why, and where in a different format before you dive into written format. Here is a bit difficult to share any specific recommendations, but I have read a lot of non-fiction books, different types of non-fiction books on Palestine. As you can't see here, I recently made a short where I shared non-fiction books that I've read on Palestine, because I just have always wanted to be the most educated and learn as much as I can on Palestine, because there is so much to learn. And when you have so much propaganda that has been deeply ingrained in the Western media, you have to seek out yourself for the information about what really happened in Palestine and what is going on right now. If we think about how to make non-fiction reading even a bit more palatable, maybe annotating could be one way to do it, to underline things that you find interesting, maybe categorize your findings in the specific categories. I personally don't annotate because I would feel that I would just underline every single sentence. Sometimes if I read an ebook, I will highlight things that I find interesting. I also suggest that you take your time to read during the day. I know it's not possible for everyone, but if you can, take even 10 minutes, maybe even an hour in a day to just read. Put your phone down when you do this. Put your phone away. It's okay, I know. Put your phone away when you read. For me, it was very beneficial to go outside, lay down a little towel and just sit on the grass and read when I was reading non-fiction books, because I am separate from my usual surroundings, from my TV, from my phone, and I got a lot of reading done that way. But I understand that's not available to everyone. But what I think is the most important thing to keep in mind when you read nonfiction is do not give up. Yes, it's not going to give you similar type of instant gratification as social media. Yes, it might be really challenging at times, but I believe that the best nonfiction books can offer you so much when you finish reading them, because I have acquired so much knowledge and I have internalized so much new information that I wouldn't have if I hadn't picked up the nonfiction books that I have read. And even though it's difficult in that specific moment, it will serve you later on. So when you finish a nonfiction book, it can be so rewarding. You have learned all this new knowledge, you have completely embraced it, you can teach it to other people further, and so on. The final step that I want to talk about is challenging yourself as a nonfiction reader. I suggest you choose a topic that you know nothing about. For example, I read Everything is Tuberculosis by John Green. I had like a basic understanding of TB before I read it, but definitely not to the expansive knowledge that John Green has. I knew John Green from his online presence and from his previous books, so I kind of knew what type of writing I would find in his book. So in a way it wasn't too big of a challenge to take on, but still there was a lot about TB that I did not know about. And if I hadn't stepped outside of what I read usually, I would have not learned that. But yes, since I was familiar with John Green, maybe it wasn't the biggest challenge to read his book about TB. But you know what was a big challenge? Reading Yannis Varoufakis' book And the Weak Suffer What They Must, Europe, Austerity, and the Threat to Global Stability. Now, I knew who Varoufakis was when I read his book. I had read one book from him beforehand when he explained capitalism to his daughter. That was very accessible. But economics is not my strong suit at all. So picking up this book and reading it was completely out of my reading comfort zone, because genuinely I should know more and be better about economics, but I'm just not. This book focused on the history of euro, how it came to be used as a currency, the EU, and how smaller EU countries have suffered in the times of the usage of euro. Obviously, I know of the EU, I live in Finland, I somewhat know how it works, but this book gave me a deeper understanding into the history of the euro, of the EU, and how it's not as simple as it might seem when you don't know anything. But my point was that if I had not read this book, I would have just stayed in my little comfort zone, reading just, historical fiction, which I love. And I really love that I challenged myself like that. And even though at times it was very difficult, I'm proud of myself for challenging myself and reading this book. I think when it comes to nonfiction reading, my top advice would be take your time. I know we are all used to instant gratification due to social media, and that is why I think reading nonfiction is such a great exercise in taking your time with the text, getting used to not getting instant gratification, and just taking your time, really absorbing what you are reading. And I think that is exactly what we need during this time of social media brain rotting. Now more than ever, it's important to stand firmly against anti-intellectualism and practicing and constantly exercising your reading skills, because they are skills and they need to be worked on over time, right? And I am still learning to become a better nonfiction reader too. Everything that I shared in this video, it's not the end-all be-all. I'm sure there are plenty of other videos where people discuss reading nonfiction. But I think my main takeaway from this video is, take your time when it comes to reading nonfiction and be intentional with what you read. And listen, sometimes some nonfiction books suck. Maybe the writing isn't good. Maybe it just feels like you're reading all these lists of people's names, places, facts. They aren't always great. So don't be scared to stop reading a book that is genuinely just not good. Don't be afraid to DNF. But do not give up on nonfiction, even if you have bad experiences. Okay, thank you so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope I see you in the next one. Bye!